Welcome back to the Exposure History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. Billy the Kid is shown standing next to Sheriff Pat Garrett in this very antique photograph from perhaps 1878. They were truly pals back then, and they even went to Lincoln County to play cards together. However, a few years later, in 1881, Garrett managed to find Billy and shoot him in a Fort Sumner bedroom. It's incredible to consider how casual this picture appears to be, yet it conceals the lethal nature of their bond. Just goes to show, the Wild West was full of surprises, and not every one of them ended happily. The renowned Fort Worth Five are depicted in this studio image from 1900, with Butch Cassidy and his Wild Bunch gang on the far right. William News, Carver, and Harvey Logan are standing, and Cassidy, Ben Kilpatrick, and the Sundance Kid are seated. They appear polished and self-assured, but this picture ultimately cost them dearly. It was brought to the Pinkertons by a police officer who recognized them after seeing it at a Dallas studio. The gang's hiding places were soon discovered. Despite its stylish appearance, this photo was a major factor in the gang's demise. Jesse James sits next to Robert Ford, the man who would kill him, in this ancient photograph that was just verified as authentic. Since the 1870s, it has been tucked away in a farmhouse. Finally, experts confirmed that it was taken in a studio in Missouri. It appears to be a straightforward, amiable photo at first glance. Ford, however, shot Jesse in the back of the head for a bounty of about $10,000 barely 4 years later. Given this serene moment, it's difficult to comprehend how it all came to an end. Ned Christie, the Cherokee leader, is seen in this picture laying lifeless on his home porch while brandishing his weapon. This shot was taken after U.S. Marshals attacked his home in 1892. At the time, police officers frequently snapped pictures of the victims they killed, almost as souvenirs. After years of hiding in the mountains, Christie was eventually found and shot after being falsely convicted of murder. The fact that even a revered Cherokee chief could be pursued like a criminal when people made snap judgments serves as a sobering reminder of how cruel and unjust the Wild West could be. An early company of the Texas Rangers is depicted in a rare studio group shot from around 1868. These guys had recently returned from the Civil War and were dressed in slouch hats and border ponchos, giving them a more guerrilla fighter appearance than official police. Many were irregulars from the Confederacy who now patrolled the tumultuous Southwest during the Reconstruction era. The distinction between lawman and criminal on the frontier is highlighted by their asymmetrical costumes and wood-carved guns. This photo from 1886 shows General George Crook in the middle, posing with his U.S. soldiers and a group of Apache scouts at Fort Bowie, Arizona. Crook was known for fighting in the Apache Wars, and he often used Apache scouts to help track down other Apache groups. It's a strange moment, Native people helping the U.S. Army fight other Native people. This uneasy partnership didn't last. In the end, Crook helped force the Apache into Fort Sill, bringing their resistance in the Southwest to an end. This photo, taken around 1868, shows Kit Carson later in life. He was in his 60s here and already a well-known frontier legend. Carson had fought tribes like the Comanche and Ute, guided the famous Fremont expeditions, and worked as an Army scout. This picture was taken just months before he passed away. He looks tired but proud, like someone who's been through it all. It's a quiet moment that reminds us how even the biggest Wild West heroes eventually faded away, just like the untamed land they once roamed. This photo from the 1870s shows Yellowstone Kelly, a well-known Army scout who later became a Wild West showman. He's wearing a fancy hat with feathers and holding a long rifle, a mix of real gear and a bit of showbiz style. After the Civil War, Kelly led soldiers on trips across the plains and later joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. This photo feels part real, part performance, just like how stories of the Wild West started mixing truth with legend. Guys like Kelly became larger than life, even as the real frontier faded away. Bison Hunters, 1878. This studio photo from 1878 shows a group of bison hunters proudly posing with their Sharps rifles. They're dressed sharp, and some of them even ended up joining Wild West shows later on. But their real work wasn't glamorous. They helped wipe out the buffalo herds across the plains. These serious faces and heavy rifles tell the true story of the frontier. It wasn't just about settlers and cowboys, it was also about hunting animals to the edge of extinction. By the mid-1880s, the buffalo was nearly gone, and this picture is a reminder of that darker side of history. William Billy Brooks, 1872. In this 1872 photo, Billy Brooks stares straight into the camera, rocking big mutton chops and 2 pistols. He used to ride for the Pony Express, then became a gunfighter in Kansas, and even claimed he killed 20 men. He later became a sheriff, but the story didn't end well. In 1874, he was shot for stealing horses. His tough look and worn hands say it all. The Wild West was brutal. One day you were upholding the law, the next day you might be swinging from a rope. Chief Joseph, 1880. This rare photo from 1880 shows Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce with his wife and kids while they were living in exile at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Just a few years earlier, he led his people on a long 1,400-mile journey trying to escape to Canada. They were almost there when the U.S. Army caught up with them, and he had to surrender. That's when he said his famous line, "I will fight no more forever." In this photo, he looks tired and heartbroken, a strong leader who gave up everything just to protect his people. Geronimo, 1886. This photo was taken on March 27, 1886, in Mexico, just days before Geronimo surrendered to General Crook. Geronimo actually asked to take this picture himself. He's in the center on horseback with his lieutenant, Natchez, and his young son standing nearby. The moment feels calm, even staged, but it was right before everything changed. Soon after, he was taken into U.S. custody, ending the Apache Wars. This photo is powerful. It captures the quiet before the storm, a leader freezing one last moment before losing his freedom. This 1886 portrait shows Curly, a 17-year-old Crow scout who helped the U.S. Army find the battlefield at Little Bighorn. He later said he didn't fight in Custer's last stand. He just watched from a hill. In the photo, he's wearing a traditional Crow hairstyle with a feather, and his expression is serious. It's one of the earliest photos of him. Curly's story reminds us that Native Americans weren't just bystanders in history. Many, like him, played active roles as scouts and allies. He later shared what he saw, helping bridge the gap between legend and reality. This old tintype from around 1870 shows a Cherokee man from the Eastern Band. He's dressed in a mix of native and Western clothes, holding a Bowie knife and standing in a photo studio. After being forced to move to the Ozarks, many native groups, called the civilized tribes, started using American-style clothes and tools. This picture shows that blend clearly. He still carries a weapon like a warrior, but also wears the gear of a farmer. It's a powerful image of how native people had to adapt, holding on to their roots while being pushed to change. Buffalo Soldiers, circa 1900. This photo shows black soldiers from the 24th Infantry standing outside Fort Dodge, Kansas, around 1900. Known as Buffalo Soldiers, these men served on the frontier after the Civil War. More than 180,000 black troops helped build roads, guard towns, and fight in the final Indian Wars. They look proud, even in worn uniforms. Despite facing racism both in and out of the Army, they did the same hard work as any cowboy. Today, they're often left out of Wild West stories, but this photo reminds us they were there, doing the job every day. Chinese railroad workers, 1868. By 1868, about 11,000 Chinese workers were building the Central Pacific Railroad. They made less money than white workers and had to tunnel through the tough Sierra Nevada mountains, often in dangerous conditions. Many died from accidents, and some were buried right along the tracks. If you saw a photo of them, you'd see men laying rails mile after mile, faces tired but focused. They're the hidden builders of the West, often forgotten but absolutely vital to America's expansion. Rock Springs Massacre, 1885. In 1885, a violent riot broke out in Rock Springs, Wyoming. White miners turned on their Chinese co-workers, chasing them into cabins, shooting them, and setting their homes on fire. Over 25 Chinese men were killed, and nearly 80 buildings were burned to the ground. There aren't many photos of the massacre, but newspaper reports at the time described the horror. This moment is a painful reminder that the frontier wasn't fair or equal. Immigrant workers often faced deadly hatred just for being there. W.H. Billy Sims, 1879. This 1879 photo shows Billy Sims dressed sharp with pistols, a gold chain, and the look of a confident gambler. But behind the fancy outfit was a violent past. Sims once cheated at cards, killed a rival, and later shot a well-known saloon owner in San Antonio. The photo shows his swagger, cool and dangerous. It's a glimpse into the rough saloon life of the Old West, where gunfights and grudges were part of the scene, even if history books don't always tell that side of the story. Rose of Simmeron, Dunn, 1890s. This rare photo from the 1890s shows Rose Dunn sitting politely in a pretty dress. She looks like a proper young lady, but her nickname tells another story. As a teen, she was linked to outlaw George Bitter Creek Newcomb and was rumored to have helped in a shootout. Historians aren't sure how true that part is, but the photo reminds us that the Wild West wasn't just about cowboys, it had all kinds of women too. From settlers to saloon girls, even gun-toting teens like Rose. She lived long past the outlaw days, but this picture captures the girl behind the legend. Anonymous Cowboy, 1880s. In this photo from the 1880s, a cowboy leans on his horse, wearing chaps and holding a rope. He casually points a pistol at the camera with a raised eyebrow, like he's having a bit of fun. He wasn't famous, just a working cowboy in between cattle drives. And that's what makes the picture powerful. Most cowboys didn't become legends. They just did hard work and moved on. This one, though, got a rare photo that gave him a tiny piece of cowboy history. This photo shows Bass Reeves holding his rifle, a former slave who became one of the first black U.S. Marshals west of the Mississippi. He worked in Indian Territory and made over 3,000 arrests in a 30-year career. He also got into gunfights and reportedly killed at least 14 outlaws. The picture shows his calm strength, a man who escaped slavery and ended up enforcing the law in the Wild West. Reeves's story breaks a lot of myths. He was a real frontier hero, even though history often leaves black lawmen like him out. This 1895 photo shows Calamity Jane stands tall with a rifle and a bowler hat, dressed like she's ready for trouble. Jane was known for her wildlife. She worked as a scout, was great with a gun, and even spent time in prostitution. She was close to Wild Bill Hickok and later performed in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. This photo shows her tough side, but Jane was also known for being kind. Her life mixed truth and legend. She lived rough, told tall tales, and became part of the myth of the Wild West. Native Prisoners, 1890. In 1890, at Fort Crook in Nebraska, the U.S. Army took photos of native prisoners, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux, after major campaigns. Buffalo soldiers stood behind them, guarding them. While we don't have the photo here, records show that even children were photographed after being captured. These quiet, serious images show a side of the frontier we don't usually see in the history books. They remind us that while the West was being won, entire native nations were being defeated, held captive, and pushed aside. Texas Jack Omohundro, 1880s. This photo from the early 1880s shows Texas Jack Omohundro dressed in buckskins and a feathered hat, holding a rifle. He had been a real scout for the Army and rode for the Pony Express before joining Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. On stage, he played the brave frontiersman for cheering crowds. This picture shows that showman's side. Jack really lived the life, but he also helped turn it into entertainment. He died young, at 34, from an infected gunshot wound, a reminder that in the Wild West, the line between actor and outlaw was often thin. Everyday Homestead. Imagine an old photo of a family standing outside a small, rough cabin made of sod. They don't look happy, just tired. There's a wagon in the background, maybe a few tools or farm animals nearby. These kinds of photos are found in old archives, especially of black exoduster families who moved to Kansas. They show the real frontier life, lonely farms, tough weather, and barely enough to get by. Nothing like the happy cowboy scenes in old movies. Life on the frontier was hard, and these forgotten images prove it. Ghost town streets. Think of an old black and white photo of a ghost town. Dusty streets, empty wooden buildings, and not a soul in sight. That's what many mining towns turned into after the gold and silver ran out. Towns like Bawdy, California, or Bannock, Montana, still look frozen in time. These photos remind us how fast things changed. One year booming, the next year abandoned. What were once lively saloons and shops are now just hollow shells. These haunted places are the leftover echoes of a Wild West that didn't last. Native children in boarding schools. Starting in the 1880s, Native American kids were taken from their families and put into government-run boarding schools. Photos from around 1895 show boys and girls standing stiffly in uniforms, their long hair cut short. You can see the sadness in their eyes. These schools were meant to erase their culture and make them American. These pictures aren't often shown in history books, but they tell a powerful story. While the West was being won, Native traditions were being taken away, one child at a time. Mining disasters. Back in the 1800s, mine accidents were common. Fires, explosions, and collapses happened all the time. Newspapers sometimes printed photos of the aftermath, funerals, tents turned into hospitals, or grieving families. One example is the Helen Mine Fire in 1873 in Idaho Springs. These images, though rare, show the real cost of chasing gold and silver. For many workers, especially immigrants, it wasn't about striking it rich. It was about risking their lives underground and sometimes not making it back. Closing of the frontier. The U.S. Census Bureau declared the frontier closed in 1890. Photographs from that year show prairies nearly empty of buffalo and crowded train depots full of settlers and freight. One famed photo from 1890 depicts 70 bison skulls on a pole at the Trans-Mississippi Exposition, a grim trophy of extermination. While we do not display it here, such images underline the moment the wild was deemed gone. The Buffalo Soldier photo above was taken just that year on the brink of a new era. The frontier era died not with a bang, but with these quiet photos of empty plains and exhausted veterans. Nicodemus, Kansas. This old photo shows a street in Nicodemus, Kansas, a town built by black families who had escaped the South after slavery. You can see wooden buildings, dirt roads, and people standing in coats and dresses with the Kansas plains behind them. Nicodemus was one of several towns where African Americans started fresh, hoping for freedom and a better life. These kinds of photos are rare, and they remind us that the Wild West wasn't just white. Black settlers helped build the frontier too, even while facing racism. Cherokee Freedman families. Some late 1800s photos show black families, freed slaves of the Cherokee Nation, standing in front of cabins in what was then Indian territory. They hold farming tools and wear worn clothes. These people stayed on the land after both slavery and native removal. They lived tough lives, often without much help. These pictures don't show up in most history books, but they tell an important truth. The West was made up of all kinds of people, black, native, and mixed, not just cowboys in white hats. Cowboy Medicine Show. By the 1890s, Wild West shows and traveling medicine acts were everywhere. They used colorful posters and photos to sell a fun, clean version of frontier life. One example is Buffalo Bill's Sharpshooters postcard, showing people posing with rifles and buffalo heads. It looked exciting, but it wasn't real life. The real West was dirty, bloody, and dangerous. These staged pictures turned that into family-friendly entertainment, hiding the rough stuff behind fancy costumes and flashy tricks. Homestead claim filing. Photos from the Oklahoma land run show huge crowds lined up in wagons or on horseback, ready to race for land. One famous shot from 1893 shows hundreds waiting for the signal to start. These scenes were messy and wild, nothing like the peaceful pioneer life we often hear about. People were desperate to grab land, and it shows. It was more of a land rush than a peaceful settlement. Buffalo Skull Collection. Some of the most shocking frontier photos show piles of buffalo skulls, literally mountains of bones. One famous photo from 1890 shows 70 skulls stuck on spikes at a fair. These were trophies, showing off how many buffalo had been killed. They're rarely seen in textbooks, but they reveal a brutal truth. Settlers weren't just building homes, they were wiping out the animals native people depended on. These photos show how conquering the West meant destroying its wildlife, too. Historic Miners Reunion. Years after the gold rushes, old miners would meet up and take photos together, often in saloons or tents. One photo from the 1910s shows a group of gray-bearded miners playing cards around an old wooden table. These weren't pictures from their glory days, but from the years after. Their faces, full of wrinkles and stories, show just how hard life had been. Drought, hunger, fights, and broken dreams. It's a different picture than the gold rush legends. Early police forces. Not every Western town was lawless. Old photos show early police lineups, like an 1887 shot of Dodge City officers or Tombstone city cops. Some wore suits with badges, not cowboy hats and spurs. Even famous lawmen like Wyatt Earp show up in these grainy group portraits. These images remind us that the frontier had its own version of law and order. It wasn't always fair or clean, but it wasn't all chaos either. Freed slave turned scout, Pompy Factor. This real photo shows Pompy Factor, a black cowboy and scout who posed for the U.S. Army in 1870. He had fought in the Indian Wars and later ended up living outside the law. With few safe towns for African Americans to settle in, many like him were left to figure things out in rough territory. His story shows that the Wild West wasn't just about good guys and bad guys, it was full of people navigating a tough world after slavery, trying to survive however they could. Inside a general store or saloon, some old studio photos from the 1800s show the inside of Western saloons or general stores. One real example comes from Virginia City, Montana, where people are seen gathered at a wooden bar. These kinds of places were the social centers of town, not just for cowboys, but for everyone. You'd see Chinese workers, women in dresses, and townsfolk all in one room. These photos, though rarely shown in books, remind us that the West was more than just gunfights. It was a mix of people living their everyday lives. Native American photographers. By the late 1800s, some Native people had cameras of their own. One example is Hopi photographer Shimania, who took portraits of his own community. In one self-portrait, he stands proudly next to his camera. These rare photos flip the script. We usually see Native Americans only as photo subjects, not as the ones behind the lens. But here, they're telling their own stories and documenting life on their own terms. Oil boom and Route 66, migrants. Even after the Wild West days were mostly over, the dream of fast riches lived on. In the early 1900s, photos show families leaving farms to chase oil booms or head west on Route 66. Some images show dusty camps near oil fields or beat-up cars full of people and everything they owned. These scenes weren't from the 1800s, but they kept that frontier spirit alive, hoping the next stop would change their lives. Ghost dance and Native resistance. Some rare and powerful photos show Native people performing the ghost dance in 1890. The dancers wore loose white shirts and moved in circles, calling on their ancestors to bring change. The U.S. government saw this as a threat and banned the dance. Not long after, the Wounded Knee Massacre happened. These images are haunting. They show the deep spirituality of Native communities and how violently it was shut down. You won't see these in most Western movies, but they're a crucial part of the real story. Buffalo, elk, and wildlife photos. Only a few old photos show what the West looked like before the animals disappeared. Some rare pictures from the 1890s show elk or buffalo herds in Yellowstone, peaceful, wild and full of life. These photos remind us that the frontier wasn't always dry and empty, but overhunting and ranching changed that fast. By the early 1900s, much of that wildlife was gone. These pictures are proof that the West was once thriving with animals before it was nearly wiped clean. Women as saloon keepers and healers. There are a few tintype photos out there showing frontier women doing jobs you don't hear about in most Western stories. One 1880s image shows a woman dressed in black behind a saloon bar. Another might show a midwife with her medical bag. These women weren't just wives or settlers. They ran businesses, helped the sick, and kept towns running. Even though these photos are rare, they tell us that women in the West played a much bigger role than we're usually told. Railroad companies at work. Some old company photos show railroad bosses standing over big maps or supervising crews out on the frontier. One from the Central Pacific Railroad shows an executive in a suit, planning routes while engines wait nearby. These aren't the kinds of pictures you see in cowboy movies, but they're real. They show that the West wasn't just built by cowboys and miners, it was shaped by big business, money, and Eastern investors making decisions from far away. Native war chiefs in rare portraits. Most people have heard of Sitting Bull or Geronimo, but some photos also show lesser-known native chiefs. One photo from the 1890s in the A.C. Vroman collection shows a Hopi leader dressed in full traditional clothing. We may not know his name, but his image says a lot. These pictures break the stereotype and show the wide variety of native cultures, leadership, and strength, not just the famous names found in school books. Cherokee Council photo. After Oklahoma opened up to settlers, some native tribes continued to govern themselves. A photo from 1904 shows Cherokee leaders during a meeting with U.S. agents, some dressed in suits, others in traditional clothes. They're gathered like any other government meeting. This image is important because it proves native nations didn't just vanish. They adapted, organized, and continued to lead, even as U.S. laws tried to erase their power. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on anything.